Hello everyone. This lesson should be fairly quick. I just want to run you through a few examples of our new CSS and JavaScript workflow. Before we begin, I do want to point out that this automated workflow we're using has absolutely nothing to do with WordPress itself. Okay? I don't want you to think that if you use WordPress, you have to use these tools. Personally, I use these automation tools because they make my life as a developer much easier, and I want to be sure that you're getting the most value possible out of this course. So even though these tools aren't directly related to WordPress, they will indeed make your life as a WordPress developer a lot nicer. Okay, having said that, let's get started. So at the moment, I've got my Vagrant local dev environment up and running, fictionaluniversity.dev, but I also want to make sure that I have my Gulp Watch preview proxy server running. So right now, I will walk through those steps again. So jump into your command line, and I want to navigate my command line to look within a certain folder. So cd for change directory, and then I'll go into this folder, Fictional University. This is the folder with those 4 key files. So if I go back a folder, I'll just drag this Fictional University folder on top of the command line. Okay, so now my command line is looking in the right place, and I can simply run gulp watch. That fires up a preview proxy server, opens a new tab in my browser, and we're ready to go. Now in our previous lesson, we saved a change to a PHP file and saw how that automatically refreshed the browser for us. Well, now let's try working with a CSS file. First though, I do want to point out that this course is not about CSS. Having said that, I do want to give you a real-world example of how I work with CSS on WordPress projects. So even though you and I won't be writing any CSS together, you can sort of dissect my CSS workflow and hopefully use it in your own projects. Okay, now at this point, I want you to open up your theme folder in a text editor. So we know that our WordPress website is getting all of its design and styling from this file in the root of our theme folder named style.css. Remember, this is the file where we specified our theme name and the author and the version number way back when we first set up our theme. Okay, so that's what that file is, but you might have noticed that I had you move over a folder named CSS. So let me close this file, and you might be wondering what is in this CSS folder. Well, if we look inside it, we see a couple subfolders, base and modules, but we also see a file named style.css. So go ahead and open up that style file that lives in the CSS folder. This file doesn't include any CSS code of its own. Instead, it imports all of these individual CSS files. Writing modular code like this helps me stay organized. So for example, if I want to edit the styling for these buttons here or this button here, I know exactly where to look. Within the top level CSS folder, you can drill into the modules folder, and then there's a file named btn, which stands for button. So any CSS code that has to do with buttons lives within this one individual file. And then if I close that file, back in the top level just style file that lives in the CSS folder, you can see I'm importing that button file as well as all of the other individual modules. Now before you save any changes to this file, I want to explain something. So I've set up our automation system to watch for saved changes to this file, and then it will automatically bundle all of these files together and create a new file that will live in the root of our folder. Right? You can see that in the sidebar, and that compiled bundled file is the CSS file that WordPress will use. Now before we save any changes to this source code copy of style that lives in the CSS folder, we want to be sure to add our WordPress comment up at the very top of it. That comment that includes the theme name, author, and version number. So let me show you what I mean. If I open up the style CSS file that lives in the root of the theme folder, I'm just going to select this top comment, right? Because WordPress needs this information about the theme. Copy that into my clipboard, and then back in the CSS folder, back in that style.css file, just copy and paste that up at the top. Cool, because now if I save a change to this file, the generated bundle code that this generates is going to overwrite the style file in the root of the folder. So in other words, WordPress is not aware of this CSS folder at all. This is just for us as a developer to keep our code nice and organized. WordPress only cares about the CSS file that lives in the root of the theme folder. Okay, so once you've copied over this comment, let's try to save a quick change. So I just saved this file, but we won't see any visual differences on the website because we didn't actually change any properties. For a quick experiment, let's try to make this welcome headline yellow instead of white. So back in our text editor, within the CSS folder, let's dig into the modules folder, and then let's open this file named headline.css. Okay, so on line 6, I'm creating a rule that targets a class of headline -- large. Here you can see I'm assigning a font size. So right above this font size line, why don't we just say color yellow? Okay, and before I save that, I want to show you something cool. So if I resize my text editor so we can see the web browser in the background, I want to show you how the CSS gets injected onto the page truly on the fly. So normally, if I highlight or select a bit of text on the page, you'll notice that as soon as you refresh the page, so if I click the refresh icon, that highlighted selection of text disappears. Okay, but check this out. If I highlight a bit of text, and now if I finally save this color yellow change, check that out. The browser didn't even have to perform a real hard reload. Our automation tools literally injected the new CSS code into the page truly on the fly. Now again, we aren't going to be writing any CSS code in this class, but you're free to make any customizations you see fit. If you want to change the font sizes or the colors or little layout details, go ahead and have some fun. It's pretty cool to be able to see your changes literally immediately. Okay, let me go ahead and delete that, set it back to normal. And now let's move on from CSS. So let me close those two files. And now let's talk about JavaScript. So you've probably noticed this folder named JS in our theme folder. And if you look inside there, there's a folder named modules, and there are two files, scripts bundled and scripts. Scripts bundled is the JavaScript file that WordPress is actually loading and using. So for example, if I scroll down to the bottom of our home page, this slideshow area is powered by JavaScript. And if you jump into functions.php of our theme folder, you might remember that many lessons ago, we wrote PHP code to load the JavaScript file named scripts bundled. So let me close this PHP file and let's open up that scripts bundled JS file. We can immediately see that this file is very messy, and if I scroll down, you could see that it's about 12,000 lines long. So you might be wondering, where is all of this code coming from? Well, we can close that file and instead jump into the scripts.js file. So similar to our CSS setup, this file gets generated and bundled or compiled, and the resulting code gets put into a new file named scripts-bundled. So this main scripts file doesn't really include any actual JavaScript itself. Instead, it imports all of the different modules and components that it needs, and this allows us to keep our code very clean. So that way, each individual file only has one single responsibility. Now don't worry about understanding the code you see here. We can tackle understanding this in a future lesson. You've heard me say that CSS is not the focus of this course, but JavaScript sort of is the focus of this course. So don't worry, you and I will be writing plenty of JavaScript together throughout the remainder of the course. But right now, why don't we test out our auto refresh workflow by writing just a tiny bit of JavaScript to create an alert message pop-up on our website. There's really no reason to do this other than just to test to make sure that everything's working. So within this scripts.js file that lives in the JS folder, maybe down at the very bottom, let's add a new line. And let's just say alert, and then open up a pair of parentheses because we are calling a function, right? You'll notice there's a lot of similarities between JavaScript and PHP. And within the parentheses, let's open up some quotes and say, hello, this is a test. Okay, and if I save that, you'll notice that I did not have to switch to my browser or refresh it. It just automatically gets refreshed. Here's that message, hello, this is a test. Click OK, and we're in business. Let's go ahead and delete that test alert pop-up message because it's quite annoying. So go ahead and save again. You can see the browser refreshes on its own. Life is good. Now before we bring this lesson to a close, I want to address a concern that you might have. Because you might be thinking to yourself, hey, in our last lesson we installed about 3 different tools and we've got these 4 key files and you never explained what anything is or how it really works. What gives? Aren't you going to stop and explain things? Well, my short answer is no. Because you don't need to understand how a refrigerator works in order for it to keep your food cold. And you don't need to understand how these automation tools work in order to benefit from them. Understanding these tools in depth is not the focus of this course. This is a WordPress and PHP and a tiny bit of JavaScript course. Now, if you are the type of person who really wants to be able to tinker with things and understand them completely, I do have an entirely different course, a 15-hour course, that's dedicated to understanding Node.js workflow tools, as well as writing modular, mobile-first, responsive CSS. But again, we don't want to lose our focus in this course. We want to stay focused on WordPress and keep rolling forward. And that's exactly what we're going to do. In our very next lesson, we're going to get back to WordPress, and we are going to learn how to create custom post types. So instead of just being limited to posts and pages, we will create a new post type named events. And after that, before the course is over, we'll be creating custom post types for programs, professors, campuses. It's going to be a ton of fun. This is where WordPress really starts to feel limitless and flexible and like the sky is the limit. Let's keep it rolling, and I will see you in the next lesson.